everyone, Alexa Den here, and today I'm going to be having a little discussion / debate about, do you have to read classics? Should we have to read classics? My answer might surprise you. Or maybe not. So we're doing another round on Twitter, or there was one recently, of screw classics. Classics are dumb. We shouldn't have to read them. We should only be giving kids books that they enjoy. Rah, 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 down with classics, teach Harry Potter. Why not both? Which is basically the thesis here. Let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. But I really want to kind of discuss why this comes up all the time, how I feel about it, because it honestly really bothers me, like, a lot. So I think we should read classics. Yes, I do. I think they should be taught in school. I think every great reader / writer should read classics. I think, well, human beings should read classics. But I don't really like calling them classics. I prefer to say foundational literature, because I think one of the problems with the word classics, the stigma of classics, is that they sound like intellectual gatekeeping bullshit, even just in the name. We say classics and you think, oh, dead white people who wrote stuffy stories that I don't really enjoy reading, but my teacher made me and I was bored. Mood. Confession. I never finished A Tale of Two Cities. I hated that book, like really hated. It's the only book I never finished in school. Pretended to finish and really wung it on my quiz. I still did well on my quiz, but I hated that book. So like, I relate to the mood of, you know, we were assigned these books in class and some of them really sucked, to be honest. But I think that so-called classics have a place in our education system, in literature, in life, and I think we should be forced to essentially read them at a certain point. Forced is such a bad word, but many classics are problematic when you put them into a modern context. There are lots of problems with classics. They really were overwhelmingly written by dead white guys, you know, white guys who are now dead. They were dead when they wrote them. And they do kind of trot out the same idea and experience over and over again. I mean, it's through reading all of this foundational literature that all of us learn to experience the world and story through the eyes of the average white male, or just men in general. And of course, it's a part of our modern media movement to have more stories, and this is across all mediums, so books and TV and movies and so on, that just open up storytelling and ideas and thoughts to explore more viewpoints and experiences. It's all good. But yes, some books that are considered classics are misogynist, racist, homophobic, and so on and so forth. And they skew very heavily Western, kind of representing the Western viewpoint and life experience and history. But the thing is, it's good for us to read books that challenge us, that explore broad themes, and yes, universal human experiences and niche human experiences. It's good to read books that we don't like, just as much as it's good to read books that we do like. It's good to read books that are written in a different writing style than we are accustomed to, and to challenge ourselves to look at language on the page and think about literary ideas. It's good to engage in literary criticism, essentially. Engaging in literary criticism makes you smarter and a better person. It's good for you. It's good for your intellectual growth and development. This is the foundation of a liberal arts education, which is what we practice in the Western world. Thus, I think it is important to read foundational books, to read so-called classics. But here's where I kind of offer a disclaimer / contradict myself, but not really. I am not actually a classic snob. I sound like one. I'm not. Obviously, I have read and adored Jane Eyre and Persuasion because I wrote retellings of them. These classic books are very important to me. They are foundational literature for me in a lot of Western society. I mean, really, any Jane Austen, not necessarily specifically Persuasion. But I'm not a classic snob because honestly, I'm not that well read. And I believe, I have a theory, most people you read who act like classic snobs are totally faking it. I have totally been in this pissing match before. I'm sure we all have. You know what? You're with a group of people and they're like throwing out all of these hoity-toity fancy books they've read. They pretend that some of these hoity-toity old classics are their favorite books of all time, and sometimes they are. And even I play the game where you're like, oh yes, I totally love, and you rattle off some title, but you didn't read the book, you actually just saw the BBC miniseries, and like you hope that you get away with it. Because I think most of us are faking it, and there's a select few who aren't faking it, who genuinely have read all of these books and love them more than any other modern or form of literature, let alone commercial fiction. Like, gasp, don't talk about popular commercial fiction with those snobby readers. And they're legit, but they're also pretentious and really annoying. I don't like classic snobs, but I also really don't like the anti-intellectualism that permeates these so-called debates about throwing classic literature out the door and only giving kids books that they love. We need to encourage a love of reading, and yes, we do, but why not both? Because yes, we need to instill a love of reading in young kids, and that's why we should be giving them graphic novels and kind of commercial fun literature, and we should be encouraging them to read those books. But the thing is, super fun commercial literature isn't always the best literature to teach in school. I don't expect anyone to be teaching my book. I mean, if you want to, fine. I mean, it is Jane Eyre, which is kind of a cheat. But like my thriller that I've just finished, which is pure commercial popcorn, I wouldn't want them to teach that in school. It's just a book that's fun. It's a book that people are supposed to read for fun because they like reading. And I'd be thrilled to know that a book like that instilled a love of reading in someone, but I would be mortified if it was taught in school in place of better foundational literature. Because again, we should be challenging ourselves. We should be challenged in an academic environment in particular. And here's the thing, when you're young, when you're in elementary school, middle school, high school, and even into college, depending on what you major in and what classes you take, this is your last and best opportunity to read these books. Because again, this gets into that whole, like, I think most people are faking how much they love classics thing. Most of us are never going to willingly pick up a classic as an adult and read it, with some exceptions like Jane Austen, Jane Eyre, the one and only classic other than Jane Austen or Jane Eyre, which I read when I was younger and just continue to reread, that I have read in the last 10 years is North and South by Elizabeth Glaskell and Anna Karenina by Tolstoy, because I liked the movies. I saw the movie adaptations and went, I should read those. And I did, and that was a lovely personal choice. I read them for pleasure. But realistically, I think we need to read these foundational classics, a selection of foundational classics, when we are in school and it's in an environment where we are analyzing them and thinking critically about them. Because yeah, when you're an adult, like, you should mostly be reading for pleasure. Like, who wants to do, like, rando literary criticism for fun as an adult? I mean, some people do, but I'm not that person. And so I just really don't like the argument that we shouldn't have to read any books we don't want to. We shouldn't have to read any books that might challenge our viewpoint. Having your viewpoint challenged, especially when you're young and your brain is developing, is a good thing. Having your viewpoint challenged forces you to think outside of yourself. It develops empathy. It helps you to learn about other cultures and viewpoints and history and context. When you dislike a book, especially a classic, I think it's important to figure out why you dislike a classic. Pinpointing why you are not enjoying this thing that someone is making you reading is just as illuminating as reading it and liking it sometimes. Another thing I think that plays into this kind of this anti-intellectualist burn all the classics idea is, I think very often what people really dislike about a lot of classics, the hardcore classics, not foundational books that might be more modern, is they're kind of dense and hard to get through sometimes. The language can be really opaque and they make us feel stupid. And honestly, this is kind of the thing I've always harbored deep inside. It's why I pretend to have read more classics than I have, and why I think most people pretend to read more classics than they have. They do make me feel stupid sometimes. And then of course it's the wonderful experience when you read a classic and you've been taught in school to kind of cut through some of the dense language, and then you get it and you feel like a genius, and then you can enjoy the story. But meaning I'm validating the fact that I think one thing that factors into this is that classics can make us feel really, really dumb. Because some of them are hard to parse and get through. And in fairness, some of them might just not be that great. Some classics aren't that great, or at least the prose on the page isn't that great, but the storytelling is good. I mean, same thing as now. Can you imagine a future, like, 200 years from now where, like, Twilight is taught as a classic? Huh. And they talk about, like, the merits of the writing versus the storytelling? Wow. That could happen in the future. Maybe Stephenie Meyer is our own future Charles Dickens, because honestly, his prose is a little bit ridiculous, but the storytelling was great. Another one, Bleak House. Have zero interest in reading the book. Great BBC miniseries. And actually, this is me, just telling you my opinion, maybe giving you permission. I honestly think in the case of most classics, it's perfectly fine and permissible to just watch the BBC miniseries because they're real good. And you get a pretty good grasp of the story, just as much as you would get reading it, meaning as an adult, it is more than sufficient. I do think there's always going to be nuance lost when you watch a movie instead of reading something that's just a book nerd truth that we all acknowledge. But with some books, does it really matter? Do I need to read Bleak House? No, I really don't. Do I want to read Jane Eyre? Yes, because no adaptation of Jane Eyre has ever been sufficient in capturing the spirit of the novel. FYI, read Jane Eyre if you want to. I feel the same way about Pride and Prejudice has gotten a little closer, but still, there's always going to be tonal choices that a filmmaker is going to make. That's a whole other topic. But the point is, I wish there were less classic snobbery and that we did kind of let go of this idea that we have to read these sometimes dense tomes that honestly, yes, can make us feel really dumb. But I think that the anti-intellectual, like, burn them often is kind of a shame reaction. No one wants to admit that they feel stupid, too stupid to read something. So they decide that it's bad. And then honestly, when there are representations in classic or foundational literature that you don't like, I say interrogate that. Bring it up as a discussion point in school, or if you are older reading a classic, God bless you. Talk about it in your YouTube video or in your book club or whatever. Start a discussion off of, wow, rape really was used as a plot device in this foundational classic, or wow, this foundational classic is really, really racist. How interesting that, what a reflection of the times this book is. And it can actually give you fascinating cultural context into history and culture and media and what was acceptable once that clearly isn't acceptable now. And this is all critical thinking skills and none of it's bad. And I want to talk about why I really am a fan of these foundational classics that I had to read in school, that you have to read in school. Of course, every school is going to assign different books, but I had some wonderful foundational classics assigned to me in school that I'm glad I read, that I wouldn't have otherwise read, and many of them were by women and people of color. Not all foundational classics are dense old literature by white dudes. And some dense old literature by white dudes has value as well, but meaning that's why I like to call them foundational books rather than classics, because some of my favorites were actually from this last century. Wow, when I read them, we were in this century, now we're in the next century old. There's so many wonderful, essentially modern books that come from the 1920s, the 1950s, even the 1980s. We were assigned Toni Morrison books in school. And that's the thing. When you think of them as foundational books, it isn't necessarily limited to just really old books by people who are totally out of touch with who we are as humans in modern reality. You can have modern books be foundational literature, which is why I'm not opposed to something like Harry Potter being taught in class. But if you're gonna teach Harry Potter, you should also be teaching, yes, Charles Dickens. Oh God, I really hated A Tale of Two Cities, but that's just an example. Or one of my beloved favorites is Animal Farm. That book was a game changer for me. I read it at just the right perfect little vulnerable age, and I already kind of had an interest in Soviet history, and it just exploded across my imagination, and it set off me looking up all this political stuff and history and thinking about socioeconomics, and it was just like brain food. And great foundational books are brain food. They spark our imaginations, our creativity, our intellectual pursuits, academics. and you never know what's going to spark with you. Yeah, a lot of books that you're going to be assigned in school are boring, and they do reflect the tastes of your teachers, and some teachers have really boring taste, or it could be the school district, whoever's setting the curriculum. And when you don't like books that you have to read in class, yeah, just trudge through them, do the best you can, and continue reading for pleasure. It can be hard, mind you. They really dominate all your time when you have to they don't give you enough time to read these books in school. That's a whole other thing. But I think that you can really find value in the books that are assigned. Or another pro tip, you can be like me and you can cheat. I got my teacher in 10th grade English to let me read The Tin Drum by Günter Grass, a book I wanted to read. It's this really weird German book and I highly recommend it. Instead of whatever assigned book we had to read, I didn't want to read it. So I was just like, could I do this instead? And she let me show initiative, show that you like books and you want to read books. In my junior English class, which I had to take as a senior whole thing, I asked to read The Bell Jar instead of, it might have been The Scarlet Letter. I still read The Scarlet Letter. I had already read The Scarlet Letter. The point is, I got to read The Bell Jar for both that and another class and do my paper on The Bell Jar instead of what everyone else in the class was reading. And I really enjoyed The Bell Jar. It was foundational literature that I sought out, and my teacher was pleased by the initiative, and I got to basically not read something else or not write a paper on something else and write about the thing that I actually was excited to read. So there are workarounds. It's just every time I see kind of this argument come up where people are like, classics are stupid and we shouldn't read them, or specifically, let's stop teaching this book. It doesn't even really matter what I think about the specific book if I've read it, if I studied it in school. I think that the mere fact that we don't like something and something challenges us, the automatic reaction shouldn't be to throw it in the garbage and set it on fire. I think that teaching foundational literature has great value. I also think classic snobs are the worst. Most of us are faking it, and I'm giving you permission to either fake it or not fake it if you want. I personally don't think less of people who haven't read classics, and I don't think anyone else should either, but I don't like people who basically shit on classics either. Why not both? I'm a meme. Yeah, so this was my kind of jumble of thoughts about this whole topic. I really covered a lot of ground. I'm curious what you guys think. For some reason, this is a powder keg topic people get very spirited about, and I'm like, why? But what do you think? What do you think about this debate that classics are stupid and we should only teach books people like in school? Though, how do you even define what people like? That's the thing. This is a really slippery slope. No one's ever going to be completely happy, but I just don't like ignoring the idea of literary merit, literary criticism, analyzing, challenging text, and so on. So yeah, what do you think? What are the classics you pretend to read that you've never read? Let's do some classics confessions down in the comments. Or do you want to try reading classics? Are you looking for recommendations? I do have those. I think certain foundational books, classics, are way more accessible than others. And that's why, I have my list of favorites, and there are other ones that I do kind of want to set on fire, but I won't, because I recognize that they have value, even if I don't like them. A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. Give this video a thumbs up if you like it, and I will do more discussion style videos. And if you're not already subscribed to the channel, go ahead and do that. I post new videos 2 to 3 times a week. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. And as always, happy writing and happy reading classics and foundational books and books that challenge you, because it's a good thing to have to think critically about literature.